Thank you all for being here. Welcome. We are so excited to be together here at the beginning of spring. Happy equinox season. We are just really grateful to be here together today. My name is Sarah. I'm part of the Land Justice Project with Nuns and Nuns. And we'd like to welcome everybody to today's important discussion of Black food sovereignty and the holistic practice of land justice. We are incredibly honored to have with us today Dr. Shakara Tyler, who's going to delve into the way that land justice as a holistic practice gets at the core of social injustice from both an ecological and spiritual lens. And I'll soon hand the mic over to Brenna to introduce our speaker and her amazing work. But before we do, we've got a big crowd with us today, and we imagine that many of you might be new to Nuns and Nuns Land Justice, or rather you might be old friends who are familiar with Nuns and Nuns, but haven't had the chance to join us in a while. So there's a lot that has been evolving over the last couple of years. So we just want to take a moment to catch folks up on the Nuns and Nuns Land Justice, what it is, and what we've been up to and what we're doing right now. So Nuns and Nuns began 5 years ago as spaces of encounter between spiritually diverse activists, often in their 20s and 30s, and Catholic sisters in their 70s and 80s. And in these moving intergenerational circles, these groups would, often to their own surprise, connect very deeply about their shared longings, their grief, their commitments to social justice, community life, and spiritual formation. The central magic of Nuns and Nuns has been and continues to be building bridges between unlikely people who share the same prophetic values. And so it was out of those values and those relationships that the Nuns and Nuns Land Justice Project launched in 2021. So hooray, Land Justice Project. It's been a really big year and a half. And as the Nuns and Nuns Land Justice Project, our mission is to create new land transitions rooted in ecological and racial healing. And we do that together with religious communities and movement partners. So as religious communities make long-term decisions about the lands and properties they hold title to and have stewarded for generations, we seek to incorporate land justice into the property planning process. And in this way, we're continuing to do that bridging. We're bridging the worlds of religious property planning and the very vibrant and intertwined movements for climate and racial justice, of which land access, tenure, equity, governance, those kinds of things play a really critical role. So as we are the Land Justice Project, it's really important to reiterate what we mean by that phrase. So we understand land justice to have three critical components: protecting land from extraction, regenerating the health of the land, all while expanding land equity to Black, Indigenous, and other dispossessed communities who have been most harmed by colonialism and our economic system today. So as part of our work, we offer ongoing educational opportunities, such as this one, to more deeply inform the work of land justice. And our land learning curriculum has featured a variety of formats to explore different ways that this can look, including case studies of land transitions that are rooted in land justice, authors, speakers, and other in-depth trainings. So you can learn more about our programming and our direct work with communities through the links that I think they're being shared in the chat right now. And lastly, I'll just plug that our next training in April is a custom designed workshop for the Nuns and Nuns Land Justice Project with our friends at the Center for Ethical Land Transition. Some of you may have had the chance to go through this training last December. For those of you who didn't, or if you would love a refresher, please join us as we focus on ways that communities can approach collaborations with dispossessed peoples from a stance of solidarity and repair. All right, and so before we begin, just a few technical reminders. We would like to ask you to stay muted throughout the interview today out of respect for our speaker. If you have trouble with that, we'll help mute you. Also, if you have questions that come up that you'd like us to pose to our guest speaker during the Q&A at the end of today's program, please send your question to Brenna in the chat. She's got a little star next to her name, and we'll do our best to get to it. So with that, I will hand it over to Brenna to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Shakara Tyler.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Dr. Tyler, for being with us today. Dr. Shakara Tyler is a returning generation farmer, an educator and organizer who engages in Black agrarianism, agroecology, food sovereignty, and environmental justice as commitments of abolition and decolonization. She obtained her PhD at Michigan State University in community sustainability and works with Black farming communities in Michigan and the Mid-Atlantic. She's worked with the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems as the Underserved Farmer Development Specialist, where she provided technical assistance to underserved farming groups, such as BIPOC farmers, women farmers, and beginning farmers. Dr. Tyler explores participatory and decolonial research methodologies and community-centered pedagogies in food justice, food sovereignty, and environmental justice movements. And she serves as board president at the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network and is a board member of the Detroit People's Food Co-op and a co-founder at the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund, and as a member of the Black Dirt Farm Collective. So you can see why we're so honored to have her here with us today. And welcome, Dr. Tyler. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brenna and team. I'm so happy to be here with you all today. It's just lovely to see so many faces, many whom I don't know, but I hope we could get to know one another a little today and have a really fruitful conversation. So I hope that I consider myself to be more of a facilitator and a storyteller and less of a lecturer. And I hope that this can be more of a dialogue than me just talking at you and spitting a lot of information at you, which I don't think is very fruitful. So yes, the Q&A at the end is appreciated, but if you have a question, a burning question in the interim, I definitely am open to stopping and addressing that because I want it to be more of a conversation. So whatever works for you is fine, but just know that that's an option. And I'm going to share my screen to jump right into it. And let's see. Okay, so I assume you see Black food sovereignty and holistic land justice. Okay.
Yes,
awesome.
I see it.
Awesome. All right. So thanks, Brenna, for that intro. I won't get too much into my story, at least not significantly, but I will share in brief. My work resides at the intersection of Black agrarianism, food sovereignty, environmental justice, and which I think encapsulates land justice inevitably. And I got through this, I got in the work through a variety of avenues. One avenue was me being a mother, is me being a mother. And mothering is a very significant practice and a spiritually oriented way that I live and understand the world. And so you see a lot of photos here with me, or one photo here with my daughter, who is now 14, almost 15, and I think she was about 6 here. And I was really just trying to give her a better diet and a food life than I had growing up in inner city Philadelphia, not feeling deeply connected to the natural environment around me, but always feeling a really deep longing and connection to things in the quote unquote natural environment that we're taught that we're separate from, right? So the worms and the ants and the spiders and the butterflies and the trees. Like I was always one of those children that just wanted to be in the forest, and not doing other things that other children were doing at the time, right? And so I really just stayed on that path. I followed my heart, and I studied agricultural sciences at Penn State University, and I just followed that trajectory. I got my master's in community sustainability at Michigan State, and then my PhD in the same department. And my focus was Black farmers because I began, so a number of reasons. I saw how ostracized, I felt very ostracized in my academic program as the only Black woman. And then also when I would go to conferences and workshops and just in certain community spaces, I was the only Black person as well. And so there was always big questions for me, like how is it that Black people have such a strong historical connection to land that extends way beyond the centuries-long enslavement period that colonialism began, right? But there's this very explicit division between Black communities and like the land conversation. And at the time, I think food security was more popular than food sovereignty. And so I just felt like there are a lot of questions that I had that needed to be answered through doing research, like one of my mentors told me. And so that's what I did. I went to grad school, did some research while I continued to farm the land, so that my daughter and I could eat fresh, affordable, healthy, culturally relevant foods that wasn't always accessible where we lived. And also just being a spiritual process of connecting to our ancestors and the creator. Like to me, touching the soil is like the epitome of what it means to be connected to things that are beyond this world, like the ethereal, as some people would say. And I feel like I'm at my best when I'm doing that, when I'm farming the land, when I'm in community with other farmers on the land, when we're centering the land in very intentional ways, through ceremony, of course, through growing food, through learning about ourselves and one another. Like I think those are very special and ceremonial practices that nothing else can replace. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that in the presentation. Oh, and really quickly, so I work on a national level with a number of alliances. So this picture right here is a gathering with the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance, who I work sort of indirectly with now as a consultant and just as a comrade, standing in solidarity with peasant food system movements all over the globe. And so moving on. So I wanted to start with some quick statistics before we got into the nitty-gritty details. I want to start with the macro before we get into the micro. So according to the U.S. Census of Agriculture, from 1920 to 2017, there has been a vast disparity of Black and white farm operators on a national level. And we know that this is not a coincidence. This is not happenstance. This is very strategic and calculated, right? And so Black farmers were at their height in 1920. And that was actually through cooperative mechanisms such as the Freedmen's Savings Trust Company, where a lot of newly freed or newly emancipated Africans pulled their resources together to purchase land from the federal government that at the time was given away to white settlers or white farmers through the Homestead Acts and other things like that, right? And so Black farmers, while they had to purchase their land, although working for free for centuries, we're still able to aggregate almost about 15 million acres of farmland that was at its height around 1920. And white farmers are still at the peak at almost 6 million, right? And so this vast disparity that existed even back then and now, in 2017 is the most recent depiction of statistics. Although the recent census was released, the 2022 census was released, a few months ago, and those stats are still being debated. So I didn't include those. But currently, Black farm operators comprise about 1% of the total national group of farmers, and white farm operators comprise about 95%. So Black and white acres owned, again, 1920 was the height of Black farm operations through land owned and just the amount of people that were farming. And again, the vast disparity. You see that white acres owned here at the top and Black acres owned here at the bottom. And we're barely even on the scale as this statistical chart shows, right? And again, this is not happenstance. So due to white terrorism, discriminatory federal acts that denied federal loans to Black farmers, even lack of representation on county committees where Black farmers were not welcome to join due to lawful segregation policies at the time. And even now, all those segregation or discrimination or equal opportunity laws prevent things like that from happening now. Still, there's significant obstacles that prevent Black farmers from entering business avenues, funding avenues, and so on and so on. So according to the 2017 census, we see here Black farmers comprise about 2% of all US farm operators. And that's really 1%. I mean, again, the statistics, depending on who you ask, they vary by source. So we know that white farmers are the majority of the population here in purple at 94% or 95%. And then many other racial ethnic groups fall in the middle, between 1% and the 94%. And according to the census, if we want to narrow it down to the state of Michigan, Black farmers are not even on the scale. According to the census, there are about 220 Black farmers farming at the time the census was collected in 2015, right? And released in 2017. And we know that this is very biased because the census of ag is still learning to count urban farmers. And so many Black farmers in Detroit and Flint and Benton Harbor and other highly segregated urban centers within the state haven't been counted in the census. And so, you know, this tool is notoriously known for undercounting farmers of color generally across the board. And nonetheless, it's our most comprehensive statistical analysis. So we use it anyway, but we take it with salt, as the saying goes. So here's a quick timeline of land dispossession and displacement, starting with the 1862 Homestead Act that basically gave millions of acres to white settlers in 1862 in the name of settling the frontier, you know, all of these historical periods that wanted to basically build industry, right? Like build railroad tracks for trade and distribution across the state or across the country. Of course, growing food on an industrial level, and just building up what we know as the US empire today. A lot of that was facilitated by the theft of indigenous people's lands and giving them to white people, which now we can see reflected in these statistics right now. Like there's a reason why white folks comprise the majority of farm acres and operators. And that really started with the land grants that were given through the Homestead Act in 1862, and then even before that, right? So the approximately 230 million acres was given to white settlers over the course of some years that started with the 1862 Homestead Act, whereas Black farmers after emancipation received about maybe 500,000, depending on the source that you use. And again, how atrocious is that, given that Black folks worked the land for centuries involuntarily? And some of you may be familiar with 40 acres and a mule. In 1865, this was Special Field Order 15. And this was the federal legislation or the federal order that was attempting to provide land and resources that were necessary for newly emancipated Africans to become more autonomous in the aftermath of enslavement for centuries. And we know that 40 acres and a mule never really lasted. It was rescinded by President Andrew Johnson at the time. And so that's why still today, Black folks still call for 40 acres and a mule, because only about, let's say, a few hundred, maybe at the lowest, Black families received land and maybe other resources through the Special Field Order 15. 1865, again, the Freedmen's Bureau, which facilitated land transfer from the white planter oligarchy to Black farmers in the South, again, that were newly emancipated and then that were demanding resources from the federal government so that they can be more independent and not have to live the plantation life voluntarily as they had been doing involuntarily through enslavement or prior to the Emancipation Proclamation ordered by President Lincoln. And the 1866 Southern Homestead Act, again, transferred massive amounts of land in the millions, mainly to white settlers, while Black communities were in the minority of the recipients of land grants or land transfers at the time. So from 1950 to 1975, there was an 88% decline in Black land loss in most of the Black South. And of course, we know this isn't a coincidence. This just wasn't Black people walking away from the land. This was Black people being run off of their land by the Ku Klux Klan and other white terrorist establishments. Again, federal discrimination and federal loan programs and other like grant subsidies. Just the gamut of historical practices that has strategically, systemically, and quite diabolically excluded Black communities from building autonomous land lives, as I like to say, over decades. And currently, I should say 2023, so Black farmers own less than 3 million acres of land and farm about 4.5 million acres, depending on what source you use, and comprise about approximately of 1% to 2% of US farmers, again, depending on what source you use. And so again, we're at the bottom of the barrel, and we know that this is something that we have to resist at every turn. So we currently live in a plantation economy, and these numbers again have shown how white farmers, white communities in general, have the power and privilege because of the system of white supremacy that has granted them this unearned privilege to be landowners, to steal land actually and become landowners, and to use that wealth to govern the entire system for their exclusive benefit. And we know that white supremacy does not operate in isolation. White supremacy is deeply connected to racial capitalism, heteropatriarchy, and overall imperialist and colonial systems. And so I want to emphasize how these systems don't operate in silos. It's because of white supremacy that racial capitalism can operate as it does, and heteropatriarchy the same. And I know heteropatriarchy may be a new one for some folks. I think white supremacy and racial capitalism is a more common term. And so heteropatriarchy, just for the sake of clarity for those that are wondering, is the system that prioritizes men or males, and specifically heterosexual people in general within the system of patriarchy. It grants a significant amount of unearned power and privilege to heterosexual white men, but heterosexual people in general that subscribe to patriarchy, whether they identify as men or not. And it's a really complex term, just as white supremacy and capitalism is a complex term. And so if you have questions, I'm happy to get.
Shakira, I think I just muted you by accident, so sorry about that.
Okay, we're good. Got it. Oops. So before I get into the organizations that I work with to counter all of these atrocious systems and build the reality that Black people need to not only survive and thrive, I want to take some time to discern some common terms that are often misused, overused, collapsed, and just for clarity generally. Food security emerged, I was supposed in the 90s, maybe the early to mid 1990s, and according to some sources before that, that was suggesting that we needed to build, again, more food access, generally speaking, in urban and rural communities so that people are not hungry, right? And so what we saw here was the influx of food pantries, food banks, even industrial or corporate capitalist food institutions, supermarkets, grocery stores, and what have you, that was supposed to provide more food access to people that needed it. And food security, while helpful as a hunger prevention tool, or even as an equality building tool, as some people would argue, which I highly disagree with, food security is on the low end of the justice spectrum, mainly because it has nothing to do with power. And so food and access, and just like land and access, has a lot to do with power. And food security, while helpful, and Raj Patel, who's a prominent food justice or food sovereignty activist and researcher, says that you can have food security in prison. And we know that prisons are diabolical, atrocious institutions that do nothing for our society. And that's me speaking as an abolitionist that would like to see prisons completely disappear as a very core problem to the overall systems that we seek to change, right? And so food security, by basically providing food to people and assuming that people just want to eat whatever is available, is not the go-to solution for us in the Black food sovereignty movement. And food justice takes it a bit further, and it's about ensuring that everyone everywhere has access to fresh, affordable, healthy, culturally appropriate food. Even land access and land justice comes into play here, because it talks about how do we facilitate more community ownership over the means of production, such as land and seeds and water. And that's where we get into food sovereignty, where it's about the more radical participatory call for democracy in the food system, where a complete transfer of power is demanded as a way to decentralize the amount of resources that's owned by white, wealthy, mainly corporate actors in the world, right? And so we know that majority of the land is owned by white people. White corporations, Monsanto, Tyson, Cargill, like these industrial food corporations, possess a lot of power and other, just has a lot of power, generally speaking, that they exert in controlling the food system. And there's no such thing as food sovereignty if corporate actors and white people historically have majority of the power and privilege in dictating how our food system operates. And so food sovereignty and food justice I think holds land justice in the cradle. And it depends on how you conceptualize and implement land justice within your specific context. That will depend on where it resides, right? And so food justice and food sovereignty are different but related terms. So I'm hoping that's clear. So one example of what unapologetic Black-led food justice and food sovereignty looks like is the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. And we're actually in the process of changing our name to the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network. And we were founded in 2006 due to the huge influx of white people coming into the city, which people would call gentrification. And at this time, while they had well intentions, were taking up a lot of power and exerting an enormous amount of privilege in the food systems transformation that was happening in the city. And Detroit is majority Black. And we're going to get into this a little later in the presentation. And so how equitable or how just is it if white people are exerting so much of their power and privilege in a majority Black city around food justice and food security, right? And so we believe that those most effective movements grow organically from the people whom they are designed to serve. And so if Black people are most affected by food and land injustices, then Black people should inevitably be in leadership of those efforts. And so the DBCFSN was founded within that framework, and we are currently thriving today. We have several values. Love is a force that motivates our work. African self-determination, which is the idea that we believe in and work to promote self-reliance and collective work in cooperative economics and self-governance among African descendants or African people, broadly speaking. Integrity, we are working on behalf of our communities and our organizational practices, and we strive to create transparency and a culture of critique. And justice, of course, we believe and work to promote racial equality and equity and class consciousness and gender equality and equity. And we are committed to fighting injustice and building community models of justice as we uphold the good food as we uphold good food as a human right. And respect for life and nature, which extends back to African mythology and cosmologies, right? Like we see the trees and the water and even the air and these other sort of invisibilized, quote unquote, natural resources, what white supremacy or Western thought will call natural resources. We see these as relatives. We see these as spiritual beings. We honor and respect the spirit and life of everything. And so we have the responsibility of stewarding the land and the water in a way that respects the integrity of their lives, just like we respect the integrity of human lives in similar ways. And sustainability, we value and are developing an organizational culture of learning, growth, and youth development. And that culture is future focused, but informed by our history. We know that Black people are not new to conversations of sustainability. I mean, we may be new in the dominant framework because we've been invisibilized and ostracized over decades and even centuries. And so sustainability has always been the core of our movement building and just how we build thriving communities. And so what is Black food sovereignty? Our definition is the right of people of African descent to access healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods that are and their right to define their own food and agricultural systems. And food sovereignty is therefore a holistic and healthy and sustainable approach for communities to address chronic food insecurity. And so to contextualize this definition a bit, Raj Patel, who I mentioned previously, wrote a really beautiful book chapter that I could link at the end of this presentation that says, food sovereignty is a prerequisite for food security, not the other way around. So having the power and the community self-determination in place within a system is important just for basic food security. And I think the more dominant perspective says the opposite. Like, in order to have food sovereignty, you have to have basic food security so that no one is hungry. But it's not just about feeding stomachs, it's about building power and when you build power, for us, food security will inevitably come from that, because we're feeding ourselves and we're not reliant on some external oppressive force to feed us. So I'm sure some folks may be familiar with food deserts and also maybe familiar with the pushback on food deserts and using food apartheid as the more accurate term. And so I use this map mainly because there is no map that depicts this in Detroit, but this is a really nice depiction of food, quote unquote, deserts in Chicago that display the highly inequitable reality of how communities of color And low-income communities are strategically placed farther away from grocers, right? And community boundaries dictate often where capitalist food businesses will locate due to profit maximization theories and so on, right? And actually in the case of Detroit, let's see, I think it was around 2010 or 2009 when the last major grocery store, Farmer Jack, left the city, with no, like within the Detroit parameters proper, not even considering the suburbs, there were no large chain grocery stores that were accessible to the city of Detroit, and you often had to leave the city and go to the suburbs just to find, you know, a Whole Foods or a Kroger or another major grocery chain so that you could feed yourself and your family. And so we know that this concept, the so-called concept of food deserts, is not a chosen term of the community. We choose the term food apartheid because we know that for a number of reasons, deserts are natural ecosystems that thrive. They're vibrant ecosystems that thrive, although because there may not be.
Dr. Tyler, somehow I hit mute on you again. I apologize when I was admitting somebody.
No worries. Thank you. So deserts are vibrant ecosystems, and to call a community a desert is a misnomer and highly offensive, as if we are lacking something, right? And to be more accurate, what we're lacking is the cause of the system. It's not something that we've done, right? As a community, this is something that was socially constructed by the powers that be. And so food apartheid more accurately captures the reality sort of in relation to the housing crisis or the housing practice of redlining, where certain community boundaries are set up where wealth cannot even enter certain areas of that community because there are people of color, because they're low income people, right? And so food apartheid reflects that reality of grocery stores intentionally calculating where they're located in relation to communities of color because of concerns around, again, profit maximization, hustle and bustle business development, and so on. And there are many other reasons why we use food apartheid, and I don't want to take up too much time getting into those, but I hope that just those basic reasons that I articulated is helpful. So in response to food apartheid in Detroit, we operate D-Town Farm as a solution, a very adequate solution. We have a 7-acre farm, and it's the largest urban farm in the city on the west side, and we grow more than 30 different fruits and vegetables and herbs, and we focus heavily on culturally relevant foods such as okra and watermelon and callaloo and collard greens, and because we farm to feed our people. We just don't farm because it's niche, because we want to make money, or because the white foodie movement told us to. Like we farm because we know that we have to feed our people, and many people we know would not eat if we were not farming the foods that farming and selling and giving away the foods that we do. And of course we grow lettuce and cabbage and kale and tomatoes and garlic and like these other less culturally relevant foods, but still remain in high demand in our communities. So we have a wide variety of things that we grow, and we have a wide variety of audiences that we tailor to based on what we grow. We also have an apiary. We keep bees for pollination and honey production. If you have never had D-Town Farm honey, you are sorely missing out. I think our last honey distribution was actually during the height of COVID in 2021. And we should be gearing up for another honey distribution later this year. We also do composting on a large scale, where we take a lot of the food scraps from the community and maybe some spoiled food from grocery stores. At least we used to do this in the past. We're trying to revive this large composting system, but we do compost on a very minimal level because we know that composting, again, is a way to restore the traditional ecological land practices our ancestors have used to ensure soil fertility. And also it saves a lot of money, so we don't have to buy compost from external suppliers. We also do hoop house or season extension through hoop houses. And if you're not familiar with Michigan climate, we have a very small growing season because it gets cold sooner than it does in other areas of the country. And so we use hoop houses to extend our season by about 2 months on each end. So we can start growing in March and we can end growing in December, depending on what is in the ground. And that would not be the case if we didn't have hoop houses, which are like passive solar greenhouses that magnify the energy from the sun and will increase the temperature within the hoop house anywhere between like 5 to 15 degrees, depending on the climate and other circumstances. We also have an 8 kilowatt off-grid solar power station. We're generating solar power, and we're working on getting the funds to redistribute that solar power to other areas of the farm, to power our irrigation systems, for instance, and our tractors and other farm equipment, so that we don't have to use fossil fuels to drive everything, which is, again, within the vein of community self-determination, so that we're less reliant on the systems that exploit and extract from us. We have a rainwater retention pond where we use rainwater to irrigate as much of the crops that we grow as possible. So this rainwater retention pond holds about 50,000 gallons of rainwater, and then it's pumped through this little pipe here by a windmill to the front of the farm that's held in these massive cisterns that we then tap for irrigation when we need it. We also provide farm tours, and we emphasize the Black agrarian history that many people are not familiar with. And so again, we are a Black farm that lives within the values of our ancestral history of Black people working the land and actually building up the US empire through our agricultural brilliance, right? Like that's why we were stolen from our African villages, right? We were master rice growers, master squash growers, watermelon growers, all these Afro-indigenous crops, as we like to call, and these other more popular crops such as rice. I mean, that's how the entire rice culture was built here in North America or here on Turtle Island, through the African ingenuity that was cultivated over centuries prior to European invasion of the continent. And the Detroit Food Commons Development Project is a huge, huge project. It's a $22 million project that we're almost finished building. This building that resides on the corner of Woodward and Euclid, and Woodward is the main street that runs through the city of Detroit. And so we are locating in the north end of Detroit as a cooperatively owned grocery store, where anyone can pay a $200 lifetime membership to become a member owner. And this is our way of having or building more power within the food system at the retail level, so that we can control the prices that we're using to sell food, and that we can control the prices that we purchase food from distributors and other suppliers with, right? And so again, the cooperative enterprise is a proven tool to build more power for the people at grassroots levels. And so the Detroit People's Food Co-op that is housed in the Detroit Food Commons as the overall building is a way for us to take back our power within the food system as food consumers. And this is just a little background or a little information on the food commons that I already shared. We actually have a funding gap. We have almost $800,000 uncovered costs for the co-op. And this is mainly fixtures for the store, like refrigeration, shelves, flooring, registers, things that grocery stores typically have. And we're working on fundraising to close this funding gap. But to date, we have raised majority of the $22 million through debt capital, public related investments and grants over the past 12 years that we've been organizing to bring this forth.
Dr. Shakira,
Yes.
if you can hear me, we've got a few questions coming in and we'd love to eventually get to some Q&A. So if you want to take a few minutes to wrap up, we can move to Q&A. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Yeah, I'm just about there. The Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund is also a program of the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, where we facilitate land transfer from the city of Detroit and other private sellers, mainly white folks, who want to provide reparations or in a more traditional marketing exchange, selling land to Black growers in the city. And I mentioned Detroit is extremely low income, right? It's not a coincidence that majority of Detroiters make less than $30,000 a year, right? Which is concentrated in the southeast part of Wayne County, which is Detroit. Detroit is also highly segregated. The green is Black people, the blue is white people. The orange is a thriving Latinx population in Southwest Detroit, and the red is a Arabic population. But Detroit is about 84% Black and highly segregated, which is, of course, not happenstance. And Detroit is massively large. You could fit San Francisco, Boston, and Manhattan within the parameters of Detroit, which makes it really interesting that Detroit is this urban center with massive population loss, but also massive amounts of vacant land available, which is unlike any other state or any other city in the country. So about 1/3 or 40 square miles of Detroit is vacant. And so what the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund does is facilitate land transfers to Black farmers that have been farming this land, taking responsibility for it for decades without owning it. And so to increase land security and facilitate land justice, we financially support and provide technical assistance for Black farmers to purchase their land. To date, we have given out 120 awards that range anywhere between like $300 to $10,000 for Black farmers to purchase their land. 43 people are landowners currently, and about 13 acres of land has been purchased. Just in the interest of time, I'm gonna keep moving. And we see this as a mechanism to work towards a system that prioritizes abolition and decolonization for Black people and Indigenous peoples at the core of injustices in the city, or really in the country. And that is it for the presentation. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Shakira, for all that you shared. For the interest in time, I'm just going to jump into some questions that folks have been sharing. I'll group them just so that you might be able to speak to two or so at once. We have questions kind of about access. So is D-Town able to also teach residents how to cook various foods, and where's the farm located that we can tour? Can we just show up and take a tour, or is there a schedule? Kind of like, how do we plug in? How do we know what's invited?
Sure. So the farm has volunteer days that actually starts this weekend with the spring equinox, or last weekend, but the weekend following the spring equinox. We open every year to the public Saturday and Sundays, 8 to 12 p.m. You do not have to make an appointment ahead of time if you're coming on those days, but if you are coming during the week, you have to make an appointment for a farm tour or to come volunteer. And those volunteer forms are on the website, the DBCFSN.org website. Mm-hmm. And to answer the other question, yes, we do quote unquote healthy cooking classes, or culturally, reviving foods classes. So sometimes we do them at the farm. We're working on getting an outdoor kitchen built at the farm, which we've been fundraising for a little while. But we have a mud oven that's made out of mud and stones and sticks. And so we cook a lot of foods in that oven. And we also just bring out grills and other ways to prepare food. And we use this as a form of political education for people that may not be familiar with, like, how to cook okra and make it taste good, or, how to cook greens without extracting all the nutrients out of them, right? So these other these high demand food topics that people want to learn about, we do that on the farm, and also in our office and other locations around the city that are convenient.
Wonderful. Another question, we've talked a lot in this, or you've talked a lot in this session about the economic system we have and the distribution of land and wealth being so rooted in colonialism and white supremacy. Can you share from your perspective how white folks participating in reparations and supporting or moving in solidarity with Black agrarianism and Black food sovereignty is a stand against white supremacy? And how do you invite folks into that? Basically, how can white folks act in solidarity with you, and why should they?
Yeah, I always love this question because, well, maybe some people are familiar and maybe some aren't, but so from our vantage point, there is no building a more just reality without a massive transference of resources that can be equated to wealth that white communities have aggregated over centuries, mainly through theft, right? Like theft of land, theft of labor, and that's still happening today, right? And so to make it more practical and more like put your money where your mouth is, to have some skin in the game, there has to be a massive transference of physical resources, and not just like, yeah, we stand in solidarity with you. Yes, reconciliation dialogues are important. Like all of those things are cool too. But in terms of actually building a more equitable system where people of color are not just struggling to survive because we're hungry, because we don't have access to land, because our water doesn't work in our homes, like all of these systemic things that has been facilitated by racial capitalism, hence the white supremacist system. We need to have more autonomy as people of color and low-income people within the system, and that starts with land transfer, right, at the basic level, and then you can go up to more things after that. And I will say that climate justice is a significant component of this too, because we know that this is the critical decade. We have no more time to waste in terms of massively altering how we live on the planet as human beings if humanity is going to continue on this planet. And I know this is a highly debatable reality. Like many people may not believe in climate change or even think that the planet has an expiration date for humanity. But even the quote unquote science, the Western science has proven this. And so after decades of Black and Indigenous people sounding the alarm that the planet is in trouble, the floods, the droughts, the increasing temperatures, and so on, and now that Western science and white folks are paying more attention because they're now being like directly affected by these climate change crises, it's inevitable that you jump on board and then allow us to lead, because our ancestral knowledges have created the world where we know how to work with the planet in a way that is going to facilitate us staying on the planet while ensuring that we're not hurting the planet, right, at the same time, right? Like, and so what do we have to do to be in more balance and harmony with the natural environment around us? And all of that starts with like Indigenous and African ecological knowledges. And so allowing us to be in leadership of climate solutions is really inevitable, which again necessitates land transfer and other physical resources.
Thank you for that answer. I can tell you like answering it. I think you're in good company in terms of people who are really, really feeling this commitment to repair that is both material and spiritual. And I'm grateful you've named some of the spiritual elements of your work. I'm curious, like what that line is for you, and kind of for the audience that would love to know more about some of the more practical bits in terms of how you've been involved in land transitions. Can you share a little bit about what your group is up to in terms of making these sacred acts of repair and reunion with land a concrete reality?
You might need to reiterate the first part of the question, but I can start with the second. So again, land is it's not a recreational, land work is not solely a recreational activity. Like it's a community building activity. It's a spiritual and cultural reclamation activity where we could reclaim our identities beyond how they've been constructed within the system of whiteness. And land, like these sacred sites of land, whether they're like traditionally or historically designated as sacred or not, are really important pieces of that, because land has always been the essence of who we are as a people. And I mean, I don't want to speak for like Turtle Island and indigenous peoples, because that's not my place, but as a Black person or an African descendant, our whole orientation around life has been based on like ecosystems, being in balance and harmony with ecosystems, because hurting them meant hurting us as a people. And so we pour libations to our ancestors when we open the season every year, and we pour libations to the ancestors even when we step foot on the farm, right? Like even outside of the start of the season or the end of the season. We have an altar on the farm where we give daily offerings of food and seeds and other kinds of plants as a way to invite the ancestors into our work, and then to be fortified with their energy. And so again, it's sort of like a worldview, like a cosmology that is in direct contrast to a Eurocentric perspective, where life on Earth to us is immortal, right? Like it's when someone dies or transitions, they don't leave. They might leave in the physical, but their spirit continues on. And so life doesn't die, as we say on planet Earth, it transforms into something else. And so that spiritual understanding facilitates our knowing that our family members that may have transitioned have now been, like their spirit has been supplanted within this tree next to us, for example, or, this praying mantis that we saw in the meadow, or on this plant that we were just cultivating the other day, you know what I mean? And so it's a worldview that we're reclaiming that's in alignment with our ancient memories and identities and like just overall cultural traditions. And that has everything to do with like the land work. Like that's how we're healing ourselves, by reclaiming our ancestral identities outside of whiteness and white supremacy.
Well, thank you so much. We only have 1 minute left, but if there's any invitations that you want to make, like how can this group of people support you right now, or support your efforts, be in solidarity with you, and in the practical or in the spiritual realms, in the tangible and concrete, or in prayer?
Well, so there are all the websites I see listed here already. Please go to these websites, and there are direct links to financially support. There are direct links to sign up to learn more if you want to do a farm tour, or just want to interview someone, or want to talk to someone about learning more. Please use those websites as tools to do that. And to answer the question about low interest loans, we consider those to be fruitful as long as the terms are more farmer friendly for us, right? And so it depends on the situation. I can put my email in the chat if you want to learn more about that. But I just think, yeah, financially supporting is a huge deal, because many of our organizations are underfunded, obviously, because we're Black led and Black founded, and the system of white supremacy doesn't value giving us money, because again, it's in direct contrast to white supremacy. And so in order for us to continue to pay living wages to our staff members, we have to continuously fundraise for that. And so that's a massive effort that I think everyone can contribute to. And then just sending positive vibes, like you can go to our social media, give us affirming messages, because this work is taxing. And so even a friendly message about what we're doing and how we're doing it and just giving us some love is greatly appreciated as well.
Well, thank you so much. Looks like we've got Shakira's email in the chat, as well as the links to some of her work. And with that, we would just love to thank you for being here, Dr. Shakira. Thank you for your work. Thank you for the ways in which you are leading the movements for food sovereignty and land justice. We really appreciate you being here. And if everyone else wants to just come off mute, we can say goodbye, and hope to see you again soon.